It's no secret on this channel that I love Guillermo del Toro. When he produces, when he directs, and when he writes, everything he does is awesome to me. I've analyzed the majority of his body of work, but I have never been able to justify buying one of his books to read and review, as part of what I love about everything del Toro does is his artistic visual style. And I just don't see that coming out in a book as well as it does in his movies or other productions, which made me over the moon when I saw that Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan had decided to work together on an Amazon original series, The Boy in the Iron Box. The tagline is,
"Whatever you do, don't unlock it."
and I just knew as soon as I saw this, I had to do this as a Halloween review. So today we're going to do a deep dive into each individual book where we will compare this to the TV show The Strain, which notably Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan wrote those books together. And we'll also look at each book to see if they are episodic in nature and therefore justified to be an Amazon original series instead of one single long novel. And then at the end of this review, we'll look at the whole series and its goth quotient, because I can't look at a del Toro work without talking about the goth factor. Starting with Falling Down. I found this book a really slow start to the series. Having read the whole thing now, I understand why it had to start like this and establish a lot of things, but just going into it cold, this book is missing pretty much everything I love about a Guillermo del Toro kind of story. It doesn't have like that dreamlike element, it doesn't have any fantasy or supernatural things in play. It's very terse and dry and pointed. It's giving military fiction, which is fine, and I think it's sort of like partly Chuck Hogan's influence, because you can see that a little bit in The Strain as well, but I don't like military fiction. And that also made me right away uninvested in these characters. Since this book is set in a COVID time and they are carrying colloidal silver, I am a little bit curious, I guess, about their original mission. Spoiler alert, it really doesn't matter almost at all. The winter setting and the setup of Hungry Wolves feels very like Liam Neeson's The Grey. And just like I had an issue with that movie because I just don't really see wolves attacking people like that, I have an issue with it here. I would think if they were in an area remote enough where like a plane crash and humanity interacting with them just doesn't happen, they'd be very cautious. I get that they need the wolves to keep everyone pinned down and stuck in the labyrinth, but it pushes me right away out of the story because I just don't believe it. And that lack of belief when this first story is all about trying to ground it and make it feel real and like have honest elements in it really makes the whole thing not work. This is a series that I listened to instead of reading, and I really didn't like this narrator's voice. It was deep and it was gravelly and it had a little bit of an accent. All of that combined together to mean that I had to listen to this story on normal speed when I wanted to listen on like 1.3, 1.5. I've never in my life listened to a story from Audible on normal before, which made this first story especially excruciating because I just wanted to get through it and be done. After reading, I did look up the Tian Shan just to see where that mountain range was, what kind of hazards there may or may not be, how remote it is, whether there was any like religion or folklore. And I was interested to see if The Boy in the Iron Box somehow related to Tangranism, which seems to be the main religious belief. Generally speaking, I don't think we brought any native folkloric elements into the story. Things did pick up a little bit when we were exploring this abandoned labyrinth. I wondered about the soldiers who were just like standing at their posts decayed. And also the description of the labyrinth here, the way the soldiers come upon it and how they react to it, threw me back a little bit into like a Pan's Labyrinth kind of scenario, because in Pan's Labyrinth we're in like World War I Spain. They're stationed here at this labyrinth and they call for Ophelia and her mother to come to the new dad soldiers like quarters or whatever. And it just made me wonder, like, when the dad came upon these ruins and set up this camp and stuff, was his inspection similar? Do like all soldiers sort of view these ancient ruins and these labyrinths in a similar mundane shoulder shruggy kind of way where like when we were introduced to it, Ophelia it is full of this like fairy magic wonder kind of element that we're not getting from the adults. And that made me a little excited because I thought maybe we were gonna get like a Pan's Labyrinth version from the soldier's POV, which could be fun. The labyrinth is also described in a way that really made me think of the Minotaur from Greek mythology. And of course, I like that kind of like evocative nature in the prose. You know, it just set a bunch of ideas and inner workings to mind that made me think, all right, it's probably worth going on to the next book in the series. If we compare this to The Strain, I noticed a distinct lack of any female characters. It stands out in Del Toro's larger body of work because even though he usually only has one or two women in his entire cast, they usually play a fairly prominent role and are pretty well-rounded characters. So not even one lady in the whole place, not even the monster being feminine, is very weird. Although it does line up perfectly with the other thing he did with Hogan, which is The Strain, where they actually had to add more female characters in the narrative to make it fit for TV. More terse prose, which I think you can see play out a little bit in the TV show of The Strain. They set it up in both of these stories to make it make sense for everything to be a little bit terse. In The Strain, we're seeing things from like first the CDC's point of view, where everything has to be kind of procedural and observation. And here with like this black ops, it's sort of the same thing where they're observing things, they're getting lay of the land, and they're figuring out how to survive. I don't love it from a reading perspective, but I do understand why it's like this, and it does fit the characters and story we're telling right now. And as far as whether or not I think Falling Down is its own standalone episode, I do think it reads like a pilot of a TV show. We meet the characters, the plane crashes, we salvage the people and the supplies we can and find shelter from attacking wolves in this creepy labyrinth. All of that feels like episode 1 of a show to me. It doesn't really feel like a complete arc for a book, but I see where we're going and what the vision is here. And when I was at the end of it, I could see putting the series down and walking away being like, that was a story, more or less. Which moves us into The Pit and the Box. This one is so much better than the first one. We immediately get into it with one of the brothers going down into the pit to open the iron box. He sees right away that it is a boy in the iron box, fitting the title. We do briefly attempt to humanize this brother before we kill him off, and it's not very effective for me personally. I don't even know what his larger plan is. Like, if he had opened this box and found a bunch of treasure in it, how was he going to carry it down by himself? And if he wasn't going to carry it down now, but he was going to like hide it and then come back for it later, he's in a super remote place. He'd need other people to take him and the funds to do it and all this other stuff. So like either way, he's sharing the money with someone at some point in time. But I guess it's okay because it looks like these brothers are both the dumb ones for the rest of the series. This brother is comically greedy when he sees what he believes is a ivory statue of this boy in the box, and then he realizes there's like a silver needle in the neck. He takes the silver out of this thing's neck so that he can at least make money off of that. Silver isn't worth that much. It's not a very big needle. I don't really understand why it was even worth the effort at that juncture. Probably wanted to examine all the contents of the box, and of course he doesn't think anything supernatural is happening. I'm like one of those way overly cautious people and a little bit superstitious, so like if I came across an ancient something or other, they had wrapped chains around a box, people who had died guarding a certain space, I wouldn't be the one going in there. And even though I feel that way, I think probably like this whole grave robbing, attempting for treasure element is pretty realistic. Even if he had consulted all the other soldiers, we'd still have ended up opening this box and hoping for a secret payday. Out of book 1, I thought the survivors were Liv, a number 2, the 2 brothers, and Oleg, the armless guy. Turns out there's also an interpreter, which really only matters because it means we get more kills down the line. No one like adds a whole lot of anything in this. I don't think the character work here is super strong. But I do sort of love how everything starts to kick off. This guy disturbs the box, dies immediately. The detail work of the soldiers looking to find him, noting there's no footprints, thinking like,
We're not alone, but at the same time, there's nobody else here and no signs of anyone coming and going.
taking detailed accounts of people, sticking together, trying to do all the smart, right things in the smart, right way. So comparing this to The Strain, this one starts a lot faster, but it does only have 6 books to do what The Strain does in 3 seasons, I believe. And also, this story feels a lot less ambitious than The Strain was. In The Strain, there's like a ton of vampires, there's a secret cabal, there's a nuclear explosion that blacks out the sun and lets the vampires come out during the day and take control of like at least the US or like a significant portion of the US. Where here in The Boy in the Iron Box, we're really just talking about this one little group of soldiers in this one isolated mountain. Episodically, I think this is also a pretty excellent like little loop. The guy opens the box, we get to find out what's in it, he dies. The other soldiers find his body with the heart removed outside of the labyrinth. The way the heart has been pulled out of his body requires instruments none of these other soldiers have, so they know none of them did it. And while they're out inspecting this and getting the other brother under control, the boy is in there and he smashes the radio. And because all of them were out dealing with this except for the one guy who lost his arm and is passed out, they know none of them smashed the radio. So they know they're not alone and that no help is coming for them. A great episode close if this was a TV scene. And it's also a really perfect little horror short ending. Like a lot of horror short stories would end right here, just leaving the soldiers alone to the monster and the reader with their own dark imaginings of what goes on from here. Of course, we get more because there's another 4 books, and that's gonna roll me right into The Hunted. This is the shortest story so far, and it is the best one. Everything really progressively amps up from book 1. I was very hesitant in the first like half of that book, and from there, I'm just really happy and delighted going forward. Another character dies to the boy in this one, and we get our first good look at the boy like actually moving about, taking the hearts out of the soldiers. And because the soldiers literally witness this happen in front of them, there's no argument about what's going on from this point out. Also, the retrieved dead brother's body disappears, and that's when we as readers know the boy can control the corpses of his victims. So if we compare The Boy in the Iron Box to The Master in The Strain, there's some opposite approaches into creating an inhumane, horrific, supernatural being. The original Master from The Strain, I think, was 7 feet tall. He had no nose. He had like that thing that shot out of his mouth when he fed. He was really imposing and intimidating and terrifying. The boy, while he's not quite human, is like literally very small. I guess he's swift. He does have that same inhumane strength, but generally speaking, he looks like a little boy. Part of his horror is that he is so not physically imposing and yet capable of doing such horrific things. Both the Master in The Strain and the boy seem to have a weakness to silver and possibly iron. After all, they put him in an iron box. And both creatures are able to control their kills after death, and it seems like both might be active at night. And while I love The Hunted, I love the reveal, I love the situation it puts all of our characters in, as a standalone episode, it doesn't work super well for me, especially because when we roll into the 4th book, we pick up right where the 3rd one left off. Like, if you wanted to leave me with the shock of finding out that the boy can control the kills and the body from one of the kills is missing, we needed to like fast forward into time a little bit instead of picking up right after we found that information out. It's not bad. I think The Hunted and Risen could have been combined into one book and sort of told their own arc, but this stopping point right here is like a chapter break and not an episode or individual story break, at least for me. It rolls me right into Risen, where I can sort of see this being like a 2-parter TV episode, but it doesn't work at all as a separate break in this book. We get a lot of information on the boy's kills and the thrall he has over them. It seems like he is able to pilot them, and the only way to stop them is to take out their throat. So shooting them in the head, destroying the brain, they just keep going. And that at first is quite unexpected and horrifying. I really love that we differentiated these kind of like zombie kill thralls from ones we traditionally see in vampire or zombie literature. And I think taking out one of the thralls and having the soldier be severely injured afterwards is a great inflection point, because once they see what becomes of them after they're the boy's victims, that they continue to be used against others in death, shows what's at stake and that there's something more horrifying than dying here on the mountain. Sets like all the soldiers up to be in this state where they're more or less on a suicide mission. So comparing this to The Strain, it does also have an inflection point where the main crew finally comes to the realization that stopping the master is more important than their own survival, but it does take them a very long time to get there. They spend so much time trying to save others, trying to like stick together and survive and like regroup and not leave a man behind. And these soldiers abandon that very quickly. I do think that's the difference between dealing with like random civilians and the CDC as a combined force and working with people in special ops. Even when these soldiers do everything right, they don't take the bait and go after their fallen comrade. They don't split up. They stick together. They create plans and they have the tactical advantage and they're trained to fight and they're still losing to the monster. And then comparing the thralls here to the thralls in The Strain, the thralls the boy have appear to be more deadly since the only way to stop them is to take out their throat, and in The Strain there were a bunch of ways that you could sort of like stop them from attacking. However, in The Strain they also had like specialized thralls, and I guess I'm wondering like exactly what the control level is for the boy versus the master here, but both of them are unique and terrifying in their own way. I do think this book has a good beginning, middle, and end. They discover information, they create a plan, and then they prepare to execute it, with like Seige setting up to be its own separate book. And that rolls me right into Seige. This is the last stand for the Black Ops team. They've set up a couple of explosive traps they hope to catch the boy in, and they're hoping that will take him out and they'll survive the night well enough that they can maybe burn it all down in the dayside and get away. I like that everything has shaken the team up enough. They get a little philosophical. They reveal a little bit about folklore and superstition and what they're willing to believe and interpret in this moment. I also think they're incredibly dumb that the explosion nearest them is the one that goes off and they decide to split up to go look at it. Whatever happened, they'll be able to figure that out in the daylight. I would just hold position there and prepare to be attacked. After all, if the explosive didn't get the boy, he was in the innermost closest circle when that explosion went off, which means his next stop is our team. Liv taking the bait, splitting the team up to go investigate the explosion site, and to think tentatively that they've already won shows a certain level of inflexibility in this style of person. Even though they say they've accepted the new reality, they've started thinking and reacting and trying to plan like they understand the boy is a supernatural, powerful being, they're not accepting it on like a more deeper, intuitive level that would let them know they're no longer the top of the food chain, they're not the best of the best, they're not trained and ready to handle anything. Minimally, they're not trained and ready to handle this boy. And it's that lack of flexibility and caution that ends up killing them. Comparing this outcome to The Strain, miscommunication and arguing often leads to the destruction of humanity against a forcibly unified vampire army in The Strain. So it is very interesting to see all of these humans in like a single unit working together, one mind, one set of leadership, no argument, and they still fail against this monster. To be fair, the boy seems smarter and more able to adapt than the master was. As an inflection point, Seige is almost surprising that it's not just straight the end of the show. But I'm happy we have Encounter because it really like puts the nail in the coffin and gives us some of those finishing details we've been waiting for the whole time, which rolls me right into Encounter. I love the monster and Liv having a conversation. I like that this monster is curious and a little wily and like willing to talk and communicate and even play a little bit with its victims. It doesn't necessarily make sense for the boy to feel this way, but I'm glad that for whatever reasons this is part of his nature. I love that the colloidal silver comes back into play. I like Liv reminiscing about his grandma and her superstitions and taking those on in this like last stand moment. I really enjoyed how settled all the characters felt and like calm and certain in what they had to do and why. The ending here was haunting on a lot of fronts, some of which were quite unexpected. For example, Liv embracing the boy in those last moments to trigger his trap and thinking about how the boy felt exactly like his son was very jarring. Why think about that in this moment? Why ever compare the boy to his own son? Is it simply the size? Is he surprised that the boy feels human when they first discovered him looking almost ivory and hard? And it sort of like begins to make me wonder about why the boy presents as a boy. Like, who shaped him this way and why? Is this smaller form meant to disarm his prey? Is it emblematic of how all humanity is inherently born with this hunger and drive, and that left unchecked it can be destructive and cruel to those around us? And also, like, why did this embrace make the boy pause? That feels very convenient. Claimed that he doesn't feel, understand, or desire love or loyalty. He just likes how people's hearts taste when they have that within themselves. Which sort of like implies love and loyalty is a positive trait and something the boy wants humanity to have because it's good when he eats them. But it might also have been implying that like the boy doesn't have those things because no one embraces and welcomes him, but if they did, he would want that. And is that why he pauses here? Because he thinks this is like an opportunity for him to experience something new? Is this a different kind of hunger? Is he hungry for things that can only be given and not be taken? Like, what he is and what he does is explained and not. So there is this loophole element where Liv embracing him and possibly loving and caring for the boy could have actually stopped him. I mean, I suppose we'll never know now because Liv embracing the boy was just a ploy to get close enough to detonate explosives. And the boy will probably never let anyone else get that close again. Comparing this with the strain, the master doesn't have this level of playfulness. In fact, the boy seems to just kind of want to exist and do his thing, where the master seems driven to dominate. There is surprisingly the concept of a father giving up everything for the sake of the child in both the strain and in the boy in the iron box. And also, surprisingly, there's like this potential that the child the father sacrificed everything for might be evil or undeserving, kind of like underpinning both these stories. In the strain, the master had captured that lead scientist's son and was sort of like training him up and encouraging him to do bad things. But, you know, he'd arguably already done the incel thing of like killing a girl who didn't like him. And he'd done like some other bad things. It was very unclear in the final fight if he was going to side with the master or with his own father. And at the end, the father sacrifices everything and in that way is able to destroy the master and free his son from both his own shadow and the master's shadow. Here in The Boy in the Iron Box, Liv is doing all of this because he wants to keep the boy here on the mountain and away from his son. And he's seeing it as like a last gift or sacrifice for the sake of his son. The fact that when he embraces the boy, it makes him think of his son and compare the two and see them almost as the same being in that instant implies that like some of the innocence and purity that Liv keeps remembering his son with, there's like some kind of darker shadow or potentiality that he sees in a unspoken unconscious level, and it's coming out and making him pause in this last moment of destruction. And the same way the father's certainty at the end of the strain is what gets him through and gets him to destroy the master, I think it's Liv's hesitation here that lets the boy survive the attack. As an ending goes, I think this is an awesome ending to a series. Generally speaking, I do think each one of the books are episodic in nature and can be separate in their own thing. And I feel it's sort of like a mini series that gets us set up for like a bigger, badder TV show down the line. Which rolls me into the goth examination of The Boy in the Iron Box, starting with the horror elements. There's wolves eating people alive. There's this boy out and about and slowly picking them off. There's the horror of not only of death, but of them turning against each other after death and being made puppets for the boy's whims. And there's fear for the larger world as a whole when they realize the implications of what might happen if the boy gets off the mountain. I think more or less they exercise every element of horror you can in this short little story. Character is king. Not for me. I don't feel like these characters were very well examined or like stood out or anything like that. There's an attempt. The brothers, their dad, get the various families that each one of these individuals have. I think Oleg gets quite a moment of characterization before he's immediately killed off. And I think like this attempt in a longer novel would have paid off and turned into something. But as it stands right now, I'm just really not vibing with the characters or seeing them as an individual. And to a certain extent, the whole like setup of this short little thing is for us to see what a focused, united military unit would do against a supernatural monster. And to do that well, we need them working as a unified front, not like breaking down into individual elements and responding on a personal level. So I'm really not confident they could have done what they wanted to do while also expressing characters in a meaningful way. More poetic prose. Again, no. This does have a blockbuster, easy to consume writing style. And I think it could really allow this series to have more mass appeal than a lot of things that Guillermo del Toro does more traditionally. However, it is that mass appeal, easy to consume, popcornish, terse kind of feel that means it's not poetic or experimental in any way, shape, or form. Loneliness and longing. I mean, they crash someplace remote away from all civilization. They attempt to radio out and the radio is destroyed. It's just them and the monster, and it's less of them all the time. And eventually, it whittles down to just Liv and the monster. Mono. Doesn't get any more lonely or isolated than that. Delving into human mortality. At least one soldier dies in every single book leading to the finale. But not just that, the soldiers really take on the concept of death and whether or not they should fear that, or fear being used by the boy, or fear what the boy will use them for if he escapes. We don't just look at death in the end, we examine what could be worse than death or more horrific than that, and we're also forced to face that as well. The supernatural. I don't know what the original mission was. It does feel like there had to be some kind of supernatural something going on since they had the colloidal silver, and that's traditionally a sign of magic, supernatural, superstitious something. It doesn't really play into the story, but obviously there's the whole boy in the iron box second half here. There's nothing scientific about him. He's like this immortal being that's been around forever. He's able to communicate with some of the soldiers through dreams. He's able to reanimate corpses. He's somehow strong enough to like surgically remove hearts with his bare hand and eats only those to survive. It's one of the more obviously and unapologetically supernatural things I've read this year. Elements of mental health? Not really. The soldiers get concussions, and notably the one surviving brother is suffering with grief, and it's making him be extreme and erratic from time to time, but that's not really the same thing as questioning your own mental health and reality around you. Local folklore and superstition, again, I'd have to say no to this one. To be 100% honest, I might be mistaken on that. I don't really know enough about the local culture or superstitions to say it definitively, but it didn't feel like it was part of that culture or faith. It felt more like a global universal thing. Now, the soldiers do bring in their own like personal superstition and folklore and theories into the story, and that's kind of nice, but it's not what I'm looking for to qualify it for the Gothic point. And lastly, a strong sense of place. And again, I'd have to say no on this. The labyrinth itself doesn't take on its own sense of personality. Like, it doesn't become this imposing figure that Liv is fighting against, or like this figure that's trying to help Liv survive. It's just a place that he's chilling at and like forced to stay at because of other elements in the story. And that's gonna be everything I think about The Boy in the Iron Box. It was a really quick read. I think it was a lot of fun and a great little winter horror monster flick for anyone who's interested. But talk to me in the comments down below. Have you read The Boy in the Iron Box? And if so, what did you think of it? And if you got this far with nothing else to add, give me a chain link emoji in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading.